Hello, I'm Stuart Rosenthal, publisher of the Beacon newspapers, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to our first virtual 50 Plus Expo. I encourage you to explore this website with literally dozens of classes, speakers, entertainers, and exhibitors. There's a great deal to learn about and enjoy here, and you can return to the site as often as you like, free of charge, from now until January 31st, 2021. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Ken Deichtwald. Over the past 40 years, Ken has emerged as North America's foremost visionary and original thinker regarding the lifestyle, marketing, healthcare, and workforce implications of the age wave. He's a psychologist, gerontologist, and best-selling author of 17 books on aging-related issues. His long-awaited new book, What Retirees Want, A Holistic View of Life's Third Age, was just released. Ken, it's a pleasure to welcome you to our expo. I invite you to share what you have learned from a lifetime of research and in the writing of your new book.
Good to see you, Stuart. It's always good to see you. All right, I'm going to jump right into this. First, what I'm going to ask everybody to do who's watching this is take all the things you currently think about, your birthdays and your age and what you're going to do for the rest of your life, and just park it for a little while and allow me to tell you a slightly different version of what I think is coming. And then you can jump back in and see if there's anything you've learned and any changes you might like to make. I'm going to break this presentation up into sections. This first section is going to be about longevity and the rise of life's third age, which I will explain. First, why do I have these pictures of these street cleaners, these public health workers? Well, because throughout all of history, humans have been searching for fountains of youth, but most of those pursuits have gotten nowhere. But it was the beginning of the 20th century when we began to realize that germs and filth could spread disease. And so we started cleaning up our streets and washing our hands. And before we knew it, people started living longer and longer and longer. And then, of course, during the 1920s and distribution in the 30s, the arrival of antibiotics, which was really kind of a wonder drug. Our great-grandparents would find themselves with certain conditions that they would just die from. Then all of a sudden, penicillin came along, and with a shot, you could be cured. Now, I'm wondering how many of you watching this know what this is a picture of. My guess is about half. But I gave a talk recently at a group of college kids, and none of them knew what this was. They thought it was some kind of a weird video arcade. It's not. These are iron lungs. And if you look carefully, you see that in each of these contraptions, there's a person lying with an angled mirror through which they related to the world. This was an area of poliomyelitis. As recently as the 1940s, we had no cure for polio. There was none in sight. And it was believed that in the future, we were going to need more and more iron lungs. And this is how people would have to spend their decades. Fortunately for us, John Salk came along with his breakthrough vaccine in 1953, and polio was rendered a thing of the past, which is why a lot of young people wouldn't even know what that picture was of. Can we imagine a time in the future where if we mention cancer or heart disease or arthritis or Alzheimer's, there'll be young people who will say, I don't really know if I know what that is. Wouldn't it be great if there were future breakthroughs that could render some of today's diseases a thing of the past? Well, the plot continued to thicken because as the 20th century was rolling to an end and the 21st century was beginning, we have breakthroughs that allow us to essentially decode our DNA, which one day will lead to all sorts of solutions to the kinds of illnesses that we struggle with. At the same time, we become more and more familiar with the world of self-care, what we might call lifestyle. How can we take better care of our bodies and each other so that we can be healthier, so that we can live longer lives? Now, the effect of all of those can be seen in this chart. This is a chart of the average life expectancy at birth over the past 1,000 years. And what you have to be struck by is the fact that throughout all of history, up until the 20th century, most people didn't age, they died. So in the 1850s, couples then say, gee, honey, what should we do in retirement? Because you weren't going to be living in retirement. You didn't have to worry about how much money you needed to save when you were very old, because most people never got very old. Our medical system didn't need to be expert at things like adult onset diabetes or Alzheimer's or hypercholesterolemia, because most people died young of accidents, trauma, childbirth, acute infectious diseases before they got old enough to have their bodies wear out. But as you can see, we're in the middle of a longevity revolution, and that curve continues to rise upward. In fact, I've been in many, many meetings. Maybe they're a little far out, but I've been in many, many meetings where I've heard scientists say that because of breakthroughs that are coming in the next decade or two, one half of all the kids born this year in the United States will live to 150 years or more. I know that sounds incredible, but let's see how the story develops. I thought I would drop in here a little bit of a historical picture. We hear a lot of talk these days about our Constitution and the wisdom of our founding fathers. So let's take a look at 1787. At that moment in time, the life expectancy in America, on average, was 37 years. That's all. The median age was 16. What do you notice when you see this picture? First of all, they were all white dudes. Second, they all had white hair. What was that about? Well, it turns out that most of them didn't have white hair, but they powdered their hair or colored it white in order to look old. Why would they do that, you're probably thinking? Because back in colonial times, and in most of the world, it was believed that the older one was, the more wisdom one had, the more perspective one had, the more one should be respected by others for their life experience. And so people aspired to be old and made themselves look old in public events. Now, that's the opposite of what we've been caught up in the last half century or so, but we'll come back to that too. Just to make the story even more interesting, here's a chart of the average life expectancy at birth over the past 100,000 years. Medical anthropologists now tell us that throughout 99% of history, the average life expectancy at birth was under 18. Now, that doesn't mean that there were never any 50 or 70 or 90-year-olds. Sure, there were, but most people died very young. In fact, about 20% of the population died before the first month of life was over, which pulled all the average life expectancies down. One of the impacts of these improvements in medicine and health and lifestyle is that 2/3 of all the people who have ever lived past 65 in the entire history of the world are alive today. I'm going to say that again. 2/3 of all the people who've ever lived past 65 in the entire history of the world are alive today. And I will tell you, as somebody who has been studying older adults since I was 24, I got interested in the field of aging when I was 24, and during COVID, I turned 70. So I've been on this beat a long time. A few years ago, I got called in to do a segment for 60 Minutes, and Morley Safer, who was, of course, alive then, was producing my segment, and he introduced me to everybody, and he said, Ken Dykewald here has talked to more people about aging than any human being in the history of the world. That might be true. But I can tell you, from having studied older adults for all these decades, most people over the age of 65 are clueless about what they ought to be doing with their lives. You know, like, who am I now? What should I be spending time with? I mean, can I reinvent myself? Should I continue working or should I stop working? How do I take care of my own body so that I'm healthier longer? Do I have an identity, or am I sort of at the margin of society? Those are all questions we're going to get to in our little time here today, but this is a big deal. Many people say that, oh, the great frontier, the great uncharted territory is new tech. You know, we're going to get emails faster. We're going to be able to do Zoom more effectively. Nah, I think the big frontier is older people. I think the big frontier is, what are people who turn 60 and 70 and 80 and 90 going to make of the rest of their lives? You. What are you going to make of the rest of your life is the question. So let me give you a framework. And I didn't make this one up, but it's the one I've used for this recent book, and I like it better than the idea of retirement. Historically, we've had three ages of human life. The first age, 0 to 30, which all of us have been through, I imagine, is focused on biological development, learning, and identity formation. You know, who am I? Who am I sexually? What kind of friends do I like? How do I think I'm going to have a go of my life? And for many centuries, that's as far as most people lived. And so societies were really organized around the first age of life. But then during the 19th, 20th centuries and such, as more and more people started living into what I'll call middlescence, the focus became on family formation, parenting, and definitely productive work and career development. And so not only did individuals in their 30s, 40s, and 50s hunker down into these responsibilities, but that's the focus of kind of the vortex of society was oriented towards those people in those places and stages in their lives. But now, as a result of increasing longevity, it's a whole new ball game. Really, it's a whole new era for humanity, because over the age of 60, you know, when my grandparents turned 60, and I grew up in New Jersey, they were great people, but you know, very modest resources and very modest expectations. They imagined, you know, they might have a couple of 5 more years before their batteries wore out. And they were really kind of pleased to have reached 60. Well, today you reach 60, you've got another 25 to 30 years of life. And if there's more breakthroughs, it could even be longer. The focus today is now on emotional maturity, emotional intelligence. We get smarter as we get older. Not everyone, but most we do. I know that I've had more experiences in my 70 years of life than I did when I was only 30. I watched the birth of my children, so what it was to raise children. I've had successes and failures in my work. I've struggled at times in my marriage. I was with my dad the night he died. I was with my mom. She was in my arms when she died 3 years later. You know, we grow up when we live longer. And so we're not just wrinkled or gray-haired young people. We're older people. We're elders. And that's something quite spectacular. The other thing about this new third age is it's a time for a new purpose. I mean, there's a lot of free time. There's a lot of wisdom. There's not as many obligations. Maybe it's a time to give back more. Some people are doing that, many aren't. And this is what I've heard a lot in focus groups. People talk about freedoms, but they have two twists on it. Freedom from, oh boy, it feels so good to not have to go to work every day and please my boss. Wow, do I feel relieved that I am not busy raising kids. By the way, especially right now during this coronavirus, if you are not a child rearing parent, you got certain freedoms that young people who are raising kids don't have. They're getting hammered right now, trying to, you know, do their work from home and not lose their job and pay the bills and keep their kids occupied and keep them trying to study in front of their computer. There's a lot of freedoms that come with being past those responsibilities. But people, and for example, for me, I've also got the freedom now from caregiving my parents. In the last decade or so of their life, they were met with lots of physical hardships, and that was a steady kind of magnet on my compass. I'm free of that now. There's also freedom too. Hey, what if you want to read a book that you like? What if you want to stay in your pajamas all day and watch TV? You can do that. Or what if you want to start a church or a synagogue or a mosque? What if you want to go back to college? There's lots of freedoms about what you might do that never existed in so much abundance earlier in your life. You might find this interesting. My company, AgeWave, as well as other organizations from AERP to Stanford, have been doing research in the last decade on happiness and other positive experiences at different ages. And I know if you turn on the commercials on TV and you watch movies, you think, oh, young people are having all the fun, older people are all cranky. Guess what? if you look at where fun happens, it primarily happens in the 60s and 70s. Young people are not having so much fun. Older people are having more fun. Contentment peaks in maturity. Maybe it's because people, they come to terms with who they are. They feel a sense of gratitude for the life they've lived. And they're thankful to not have to be putting up with a lot of what a lot of younger people are wrestling with. And happiness. It's a big study at Yale about this. It's called the U curve of happiness, that there's some happiness in our youth, and then it drops down. And then when we grow older, happiness rises up again. And so the third aid of life is a time of well-being mentally. And even during COVID, we've seen in research we've done that during COVID, older adults have been less damaged, even though they're more at risk for the fatality of the disease. They've been less damaged by psychological issues because they're more resilient. They've got some more safety nets, and they've got a lot more emotional intelligence. They've got some perspective. You probably got some of that. Let me introduce another theme here. I was thinking about this lately, like how change happens. 1954, I think it was, a young medical student, Roger Bannister in Great Britain, broke a 4-minute mile. And before then, it was believed that humans could simply not run that fast. There was research, there was data. The human body could not go that fast. And then he broke the 4-minute mile. And within a couple of months, someone else ran faster than him. And within a few decades, thousands of people all over the world were breaking 4-minute miles. It seems that if we get a notion in our mind about what's possible, we get stymied by it. But if we see new possibilities, if we see somebody at 60 going back to school, or 80 at the gym, or 85 falling in love and getting married, all of a sudden we say, whoa, I didn't know that was possible. And it changes things, changes expectations. Great example, of course, was John Glenn. I was asked to do the CNN commentary when John Glenn announced he was going up into space. And I knew Glenn. I testified beside him in Washington. He was a tough guy. But I watched the first few interviews that a lot of young reporters were doing, and they were kind of poking at him. You know, it's like, don't you think you're a little old for this? And shouldn't you be playing golf? And what happens if you get sick while you're up there? And Glenn, didn't buy it. He said to these young reporters, hey, just because I'll be 77 doesn't mean I still don't have dreams. And that really got me thinking, because I thought, wow, what's he saying here? I think we think that when we were young, we had hopes and dreams, and then we either achieved them or we didn't. And so what? Then you're done. Or kids maybe have hopes and dreams. But what Glenn was saying is, if you're going to live 80 or 90 or 100 years, you ought to get some new dreams. You ought to get some new hopes. And maybe you're a late bloomer. And maybe some things you put aside when you were young, or some teacher told you you weren't good at, maybe it's time to revisit those and bring them out. And you may find that there's more of you kind of waiting to be discovered and waiting to be released than you ever imagined. Here's an example of one of those Roger Bannister moments for me. Here's a gal at 86 working out at the gym. All right, so this should make us think a little bit. This is a chart of life expectancy at birth from 1950 to about where we are now. And as you can see, it's getting higher and higher and higher. And yet the average age of retirement, it's been getting lower and lower and lower. So there's a lot of questions people ought to be asking. One of them is, hey, why am I retiring so young? Or B, Do I really want 25 years of leisure? Maybe you do. Then there's another really good question. Can you afford that? You know, it was one thing when our grandparents had to have enough savings and Social Security and some pensions uh, to be able to go 5 or 6 years, but 25, 30 years, that's a long time. I think a lot of people would do well to be thinking about, should I be working a little bit longer? Even if it's at a different job, should I keep my nest egg building a little bit longer if I'm going to be a longer lived man or woman? By the way, I'll also tell you that women live on average 5 years longer than men. And so here's the thing we seldom hear talked about. And by the way, because of some earlier economic notion that the guy was supposed to be the breadwinner, women generally in America, it's true, average higher age of men is about 2.5 years. So women marry men about 2.5 years older than them. Some women marry men the same age as them, somebody 20 years older than them, but it's 2.5 years on average. So what that means at the end of a man's life, he's likely to be cared for by his loving wife, which will deplete her and probably deplete a lot of the finances. The man dies, and then she lives on for another 7 to 10 years. Who's going to look after her? Does she have enough money? Did she retire too young? Is she not living in the right house? Maybe she wants to be closer to her friends or the grandchildren. Maybe the guy didn't think about these things. These are all questions for our third age. I saw these a couple of pictures recently. There's an organization called growingbolder.com, which you may want to tune into. This is a 78-year-old sculptor who says, every morning when I wake up, I say, I'll never be as young as I am today. Today's the youngest day of the rest of my life. Get up and do something fun. Or how about this one? A 94-year-old Masters rowing champion, Charles Euster. He says, we have confused illness with the process of aging, which can be thoroughly healthy. Illness is not a necessary part of aging. I like this gal. She's a 102-year-old cowgirl, and she says, you don't just let that rocking chair take over. You get up and you go, even if you don't want to. So these are elders giving us some counsel from their position in life. And I think it's counsel worth paying attention to. Let's take a look at the health issue for a minute. Let's dive into these different dimensions of life third age. First, if you ask retirees, as I've done and my firm has done with our research, what's the key to a healthy longevity? What you hear over and over and over again is having good health. Yet it's very disconcerting because about half of people over 50 don't exercise at all and don't eat healthy diets. And much of that has gotten worse during the coronavirus. So here we think that this is the most important thing in the world. And a lot of us don't do what we know we could do to feel better and to be healthier. There are definitely changes that are inclined to happen with an aging body. You might have more circulatory problems. You might have arthritis in the joints. You might have varicosity in your veins. You might have orthopedic impairments. You know, it just can go, like, it really ruin your day. Doesn't mean you have to have any of these, but these are more the concerns of older people than they were of younger people. I'll just give you one example, a word that you may never have heard of, sarcopenia. Sarcopenia is what happens with aging to the muscles. They grow weaker, they grow more flaccid, they lose their vitality, unless you really work hard to keep them fit. So the same thing about metabolism. Your metabolism slows down generally as you age. And so if I eat the exact same meal today, now that I'm 70, that I ate when I was 30, I'm going to gain weight. So you can't be and do the same thing you did when you were young and expect to have a healthy, fit body. You have to work out more. You have to eat even healthier. Well, let's build the plot here a little bit. I think of it in terms of how do we match our health span to our lifespan. Now get ready for this. I'll explain these charts. These vertical charts display the average life expectancy in a sample of countries. You see, as I already mentioned, the United States, we're pretty darn proud of ourselves for living almost 79 years on average. In fact, we spend so much money on healthcare, it's like almost unbelievable. It's more than any other country in the world. But as you can see, there are some countries that don't live as long as we do, Russia and China. But there's other countries like Canada and Japan that live much longer than we do. In fact, there are 33 countries in the world that live longer than we do. We're very mediocre when it comes to longevity. But wait, there's more. That little red bar on the top shows you the number of years that people spend in a state of illness. So what's the lifespan and what's the health span? Turns out in the United States, not only do we have a mediocre lifespan, we have a really crummy health span. We spend 10 years on average in a state of illness. Now, first of all, that doesn't feel good. Second of all, it means that we're going to have a harder time doing the things we want to do. And third, it's really expensive, not only for the government, but for you. Watch. What are some of the changes we need? First of all, our doctors, as wonderful as they may be, my physician is a wonderful woman. But has she been trained in geriatric medicine? No, most doctors haven't. It may surprise you to know that when the boomer generation came along, there were about 4,000 pediatricians. Because of that huge wave of kids, pediatrics became a very in specialty. And before you knew it, we have what we have today, 58,000 plus pediatricians. But now we got, 100 million people over 50 and less than 6,000 geriatricians. This is not a good thing. It's not a good thing because very often doctors don't understand the complexity of prescribing medicine to a 61-year-old who's got 3 conditions, or an 84-year-old who's seeing 2 other doctors, one for rheumatology and maybe one for respiratory challenges. And those doctors don't always talk to each other. And so the absence of geriatric attention may be damaging some of our loved ones. This may surprise you, or maybe it won't. I looked this up recently. I thought, well, sometimes you get a mark of a culture by who it rewards. If you look at all the specialties of medicine, these are just a sample. Who gets paid the most? Plastic surgeons. Who gets paid the least? Geriatricians. Now, that's not going to attract a lot of the people we want to be attracted to helping us grow old well. Maybe we ought to do some thinking about that. There's another thing I want to say about our medical system, and this is a document I get each month, for Medicare. So as you see, and I took out my name and address and my number, but this is mine. On the upper left, it says, this is your Medicare premium bill. Maybe you get one of these. On the upper right, it says, this is not a bill. Now, what? I mean, honestly, I've got a PhD. I've been working in the gerontology field for 45 years. I've written 17 books. I don't understand this. This is incomprehensible. We have tens of millions of us getting communications from Medicare and all the health insurers and AARP. And I get one from AARP every 15 minutes. And they're all trying to get me to buy the sup and tell me why Medicare traditional is not good enough. And what about the donut hole? And what do I know about Part A and Part B? And it's like, wait a minute. Why is it so confusing to get medical care and clarity in the communications? This is not fair. We need to clean up this system. Here's another problem. We need more science. We have problems of aging. Some of them are crummy, especially a gentleman in the lower left-hand corner. He's got Alzheimer's. Crummy. 1 in 3 people over 85 has got Alzheimer's and related dementias in this country. It's a crummy disease. My mom, who is just simply the kindest, nicest person I ever knew, spent her last 12 years being pulled down and decimated by Alzheimer's. I remember on one occasion, she fell and broke her pelvis. She lived in Florida with my dad, and my brother and I flew down, and he lived in Jersey. I live in California. And we put her in an assisted living facility for a month. And the head of the facility came to visit and they said, "Oh, Ken Dykewall, I've read a couple of your books. We'll take special care of your mom." And I thought, this is kind of interesting. I may get some quality care for my mom. Okay, I'm not complaining about that. A couple of days later, we showed up, and my mother during the night needed to go to the bathroom and didn't know where she was. So she found her way to the buttons and pushed some, and an aide apparently came and lifted her up pretty well naked, put her on the toilet, and forgot about her. We arrived in the morning, and our mom was sitting on the toilet crying. Now, what's up with that? How can we allow a disease like Alzheimer's to be so pervasive? And I have to tell you, I am really troubled by coronavirus. I understand the death rates are particularly high among people over the age of 80, about half of whom are in skilled nursing facilities. But pick a number, 1 million, 2 million. How many Americans might be infected with this disease? Well, we've got 5.5 million Americans with Alzheimer's right now. And we're not paying proper attention to this disease. You might find this interesting. How much do we spend per person per day on defense? Spend a good amount, more than the next 4 countries combined and in the world. And okay, let's say we need that. How much we spend on Medicare? Quite a lot. Okay, let's say we need that. But how much do we spend on the science, the medical science that would possibly give us breakthroughs in Alzheimer's or heart disease or cancer? Not much. And I've watched every single debate over the past decade in our political arena, and this is never discussed. For every dollar we spend on caring for a wonderful individual who's a victim of Alzheimer's, we spend less than a half of a penny on trying to beat the disease in the first place. What about wellness? Good idea. Trying to improve our overall level of health and well-being. What are the parts? Healthy nutrition. Turns out only about half the American public states that they eat healthy when they're older. I mean, how smart is that? It seems to me that, if we know that cigarette smoking is bad for your health, well, some foods are not great for your health either. I'll give you my own personal story. My wife and I were very impressed with the work of Nathan Pritikin, friends with Dean Ornish, friends with Mark Hyman, friends with a lot of the leading nutritional experts. So we eat largely a vegetable, plant-based diet. I haven't eaten red meat in 35 years. Am I the healthiest guy in the world? No, but I'm doing okay. And I think my approach to nutrition has been a very valuable piece of that. Maybe you should think about what could you eat a little bit less of, maybe a little less caffeine, a little less red meat, a little less fat, a little less caffeine, a little less sugar, a little more vegetables. Make sure you're hydrated. It doesn't have to be a dramatic, crazy thing. A few adjustments can improve your health now and in the long term. Exercise, extremely important. Our grandparents didn't need to exercise because they did physical work. They walked a lot. They rode bicycles. They even got up when they turned the TV channel. We spend so much of our time not moving, just touching buttons and dials. We've got to make exercise a regular part of our lives. And yes, managing stress, either through prayer or meditation or mindful activities, very important to take our stress levels down. Last, I want to talk about, we often, when we think of wellness, we think of, the physical things you can do. There's a lot of research that's coming out recently on the importance of social connections, time with loved ones, not just sitting in front of the TV set, but time with your grandkids or time with the kids in the community or time with friends or going back to college or taking some night courses where you're meeting people. Obviously, during COVID, we're all kind of distanced, but even if it's done through Zoom, the importance of relationships. They say that being isolated is equivalent to smoking a pack and a half of cigarettes a day in terms of its negative effects on your health. Where I think we're heading, towards a kind of a precision medicine. I'll give you an example. In the last few years, this, Waze came along, and there's others as well. But the idea of it is, if you want to get somewhere in your car or on your bike or walking, you can program in where you are, and you can program in where you want to get to, and the algorithms kind of add and subtract all the things in the way, and there's traffic here, and there's road damage there, and they'll get you the fastest possible route, the most efficient route to your ideal destination. Well, I think we're going to need to have that with healthcare, because when the average person says you ought to exercise, well, which kind? I mean, Pilates, yoga, aerobics, Zumba, and I've got a right artificial shoulder, for example. Do I do the same exercise with my right shoulder as I do with my left? I'd like some guidance. Or, gee, should I take vitamin supplements? A lot of older people do. I do myself. But I like to know which ones I should take. What about my sleep? And so on. The idea of being able to have each of us kind of plug in how we're doing now and how healthy we dream of being, and having precision medicine be able to guide us there personally. Let's take another look at an aspect of life's third age, and that's kind of a fun side. Time affluence, a word that I made up. What do I mean by that? Well, turns out we're going to be getting a longevity bonus. Okay, so historically, people have lived a kind of a linear life plan. You learned, you worked, you rested, then you died. And that was how it was all packed together. And I'll show you some pictures. First, you learned, and you're only supposed to do that once. There's even a theory. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. Who made that up? But then you fell in love. And it was believed that, yeah, one relationship was going to last forever and till death do you part. And then you had kids, and the kids just always turned out perfect. And then right before you died, you took a cruise, and that was the package. Okay, so that's a little bit corny, but it makes the point that we live this kind of linear life plan. But what if all of a sudden you knew you were going to have another 20 or 30 years beyond what your grandparents had? Would you stick them at the end? I don't think so. I don't think so. What I've seen is that most people are saying, hey, you know what? I don't just want to be an old person longer. I'd like to be young longer. I'd like to be middle-aged for decades. I'd like to be no age at all. What people are talking about is taking that longevity bonus and distributing it throughout their lives to live a kind of a cyclic life plan, to go back to school at 40 or 60, to reinvent a career after you retired. If you've been in a relationship where your partner has either passed away, or you've fallen out of love, and you've divorced, maybe there's love to be found in one's later years. I'll tell you a story. Many decades ago, my father-in-law, Stan, died at the age of 60, a really young man. He had a type of cancer, a mesothelioma, and he died in a month. And his wife, Sally, my mother-in-law, was very traumatized by this because they had been together since high school. And she moped around. She came and lived with us for a half a year. And it's the end of my life. And what am I going to be? And she's back in Los Angeles where she lives. And I get a phone call from her. And she says, Kenny, I need for you to come down. She called me Kenny. I got something really important I want to ask you about. And I said, Sally, you okay? She says, I don't want to do this on the phone. But don't bring Maddie or the kids. Oh, I got nervous, jumped on a plane, met Sally the next night in a restaurant in Los Angeles. Sally, what's up? She says, well, why don't you have a glass of wine? I said, no, I'm not going to have a wine. Tell me, what's going on? She says, have a glass of wine. I says, no. What is it you want to talk about? She says, sex. Waiter, may I get a glass of wine, please? My mother-in-law was starting to date, and she wanted to get some intel about the sexual revolution. And she trusted me enough to ask me questions. She was in her early 60s. I was in my 40s, I guess, maybe 50. And I was okay. She wanted to know about what guys expect from women, and what makes for a good date, and what makes for a sexy relationship. And I was so thrown by it. I was drinking glasses of wine, one after the other. But I'll tell you what, about a year later, we get a phone call from Sally. She wants my wife and I both on the phone. She'd fallen in love. And we were like, wait a minute, are you sure? And I'm wondering, by the way, if any of my advice was worked out for her. I didn't ask, but she says, yeah, and I've met this wonderful guy. When did you meet him? 2 days ago. He said, oh, great. What's his name? Ray. Well, where does he live? Here. Oh, you mean in Calabasas near where you live? Oh, no, no, no. Here. He moved in. And my wife and I immediately think, oh my goodness, it's one of those 60-minute stories about an older woman getting, embezzled by somebody. And we tried to check him out. And then a couple of weeks later, they came up to visit. And what had happened was she met a great guy whose wife had passed away a few years before. And they fell crazy in love and moved in together after 2 days. And they got married in our home a little while later, and they had 25 wonderful years together. Sally would say the best years of her life, with the love of her life. She passed away several years ago, also from Alzheimer's, and my stepdad, Ray, is still a dear member of our family. So what happens in this cycle life plan is that everything breaks a little bit loose from old-fashioned standards as to what you're supposed to do when. Let's take a look at work. We've asked people, what do you think you're going to miss the most if you stop working? And pre-retirees say, oh, I know what I'm going to miss, the money. But then we ask same number, thousands of retirees, okay, now that you're retired, what do you miss the most? Wasn't the money. Money mattered. They missed the action. They missed the social connections. They hadn't really realized how lonely it can be, not having people to work with and asking about their kids, and having folks saying hi in the morning, or having clients or students if you're a teacher, or people you were mentoring. They missed it a lot. And I would advise people, if you're on the edge of retiring or you have retired and you have not replaced those social connections that you had at work with new ones, you're going to be bummed out. So we asked people, what would be the ideal plan for working in this third age? Interesting. 29% of people say stopping work and never working again. I will tell you something about this, that in the 45 years I've been working in gerontology, there's been a flip-flop. About a quarter of a century ago, the people who wanted to retire young were very successful people. The super successful people were the most likely to be retired and retired young. It's reversed. Today, the super successful people are reinventing themselves, starting new careers. It's like Bill Gates going from being a corporate executive to a philanthropist. The most likely to retire and retire young are physical laborers and people who never liked their job. If I would have bumped into you on a bus or a train or a plane 25 years ago and I didn't know you, a question might be, do you work? And if you said, no, I'm retired. And if I said, really, what age did you retire? And you said 51, I'd be in awe. I'd say, wow, congratulations. Now today, I meet more and more successful people who are so excited by the fact that they have found something new to do with their lives and believe that the whole idea of being done completely at retirement was a bad idea. By the way, some people want to work full time, not many. I mean, we got two guys in their 8th decade of life running for president right now. And when some of you watch this, that election may have concluded. But who would have imagined that? By the way, I've given talks to college students, and they also don't want to work full time. It was like they say, why during the industrial era did somebody dream up the idea you're supposed to work like a nut for 40 years and then do nothing for 25 years? Why not have a better blend? And that's exactly what people are saying they want to do. 39% of the people in our study say they like to work, but not so much. Maybe 3 days a week, maybe 8 months a year, that'd be fine. And other people say they'd like to work on projects. Maybe that's what you'd like to do. Work for a while on something, then take a half a year off, then jump into something else and take a few months off. Sometimes people say to me, can you think of a best practice? Are there types of work that are in a way setting the pace for this kind of flexible work. And I think, well, some people are mentors, so they glide in and out. But I think a great example is the Rolling Stones or anybody in the entertainment industry. They do gig work. They get involved, Stones, they do a tour. Jagger stops the tour, goes out and gets his heart valve replaced, gets back on tour, and then they take a half a year off before doing their next tour. That in some ways may become the model for a lot of our work paths. What else should we know about this stage of life? That time affluence point I mentioned. As we become empty nesters and then either partially or fully retired, we're going to have decades of free time. No one's ever had this before. In fact, the boomers in the United States alone are going to have 2.5 trillion hours of free time on their hands. And most are just no idea what I'm going to do with that. In fact, and get ready for this. Last year, the average retiree watched 48 hours of television a week. Now, I got to tell you, I got an attitude about this. This seems to me like a Kurt Vonnegut bad short story, that the entire purpose of human evolution is to create long-lived humans so that they can sit around and watch TV all day long. There's got to be something more useful and purposeful. In fact, that's a beef of mine. I think a lot of people get all worked up about wanting to be youthful when they enter their third age, and that's fine. I'd like that too. But I think we all ought to think a bit about how to be useful and not irrelevant as we grow older. Some other words to change when it comes to leisure, and if we could ever get back to travel again, and I sure hope we can one day, people talk about they've got their bucket list. I don't like that. I mean, the bucket list, I get the idea, you kick the bucket soon, so what are you going to do before you kick the bucket? Bad idea. I rather like the idea of peak experiences. And it draws from the work of Abraham Maslow, a psychologist, and the idea is that what are the great moments that you want to try to conjure up? And maybe it's doing something active. It's taking a hike to a mountaintop. Maybe it's doing something romantic. My wife and I get remarried every year in a different location with a different religion. Maybe it's doing something peaceful. Maybe it's being with your best friend, or maybe it's just playing with your grandkids. Doesn't have to be expensive. Now let's take a look at family in life's third age. Check this one out with me. In the middle of this picture is a lovely little guy named Bradley. He's 3. Okay, nothing strange about that. Sitting next to him is his dear mom. She's Christina. She's 27. But wait, standing up is the grandmother, who's in her 40s. Wait, then there's the great-grandfather, Bob, who's 78. But that's not all. There's the great-great-grandmother, Kitty, who's 95. By the way, this was in the New York Times. And there's the 118-year-old great-great-grandmother. We are heading towards, as a result of longevity in life's third age, 6-generation families. So when people say, oh, you're not young anymore, you're old. No, man, that's like when I was a kid, we had 3 ice creams, vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry. And if you went to a really like way out there restaurant, they might have Neapolitan. You know, now there's like 1,000 types of ice creams. I'm not saying there's going to be 1,000 stages of life, but the idea that there's young and there's old and there's only 2 buckets of that, obsolete. 6-generation families. What else about the family? I sometimes am told that the families are kind of like sandwiched generations. Too simple. It's way more complicated than that. Let's take a look at this family. There's usually a family manager. In this case, her name is Karen, and she's 52. By the way, most family managers are in their 50s, and they're almost always women. She's doing fine with her daughter, but her daughter's marriage is just dissolved. And so the daughter and the grandchild have moved back in with her. And she's got a son who, let's just say, is not being all he can be, and she's supporting him. At the same time, she's got a mom and a dad who are doing fine, but she has to figure out their Medicare bills because she's coordinating that. And by the way, a lot of family caregivers are also family financial caregivers. You may be. And she's got a mother-in-law who's needing nursing facilities, and she's actually paying for that. She's got a husband who's doing okay, and a sister's doing fine, but they're worried about the family. A lot of people think that retirement is a solo project. You know, you go to your financial advisor, what do you want to do in your retirement? No, most retirements are a family project. Good idea to talk to your family members about what they need or what they imagine for you, or what help you might need, or what help they might need, and whether or not you're willing to give that help so that you can get on with this third age of your life. There are some problems. Adult children under the age of 34 are having a slower time getting going, kind of a failure to launch. They're staying at home longer. COVID has really made it hard for a lot of young adults to support themselves. College debt is rough. And so last year, men and women around the age of retirement contributed $500 billion to their adult children's lives. That could be paying their phone bills, their health insurance, cost of a car, cost of a house, subsidizing payments for groceries. It's a lot of stuff, and it's a lot of money, and it's not just one person, it's a lot of us. How much are they contributing to their own retirement savings? Half as much. We asked in a recent study, are you willing to financially support your family members, even if it could jeopardize your own future? And 71% said yes. So how do I read that? I think we're a generous people. I think we won't turn our backs on our brothers or our sisters or on our children or our moms or dads. And that's an incredible quality. But if at the end of the day, you've only got so many resources and you're giving them to people you love, then you're going to become a burden on your family, or you're going to run out of money before your days are over. We currently have 40 million caregivers in the United States, informal family caregivers. I've got a friend who created this ad for Gillette that I think does a sensitive job of showing us the world from the point of view of a caregiver.
Good morning, sir. Ready to get up? Let me get your feet up. How you doing today? Okay. Good morning. I remember always looking at my dad's arms like when I was like 8, 9, 10 years old. He had arms like Popeye. He was a tugboat captain, and I so admired his physique. And now it's a different story, you know? And that's just the way it is. So my dad had a stroke, and now he can't get around, he can't walk. And he needs me to help him out. And my son Luke and I have been doing it. And I'd do anything for him. I can give you a really good mohawk. You look like a punk rocker. There's a definite role reversal that happens. I have to wake him up in the morning and take care of him and groom him and shave him and shower him. It's actually an honor to do that for your father, because he did it for me when I was a kid. You know, it takes me like a half an hour to shave my father because I have to be so careful.
Tell me what that is.
Okay, I will. Oh, there we go. Okay, good. I love that face. Hi. I'm one of the lucky ones. A lot of my friends my age do not have their dads, and I still have my dad. He always says to me, he looks up at me after I pour love on him for the whole day, and he says, "I don't know what I did to deserve you." And I say, "Dad, I got you. I got you, Dad."
So another dimension regarding family is, I know when I was growing up, your family were your blood relatives. That was what, I mean, what else? That's what it was. But more and more today, people are thinking that you have a family of choice. First of all, you may not like some of your blood relatives. You may not have talked to some of them for decades. So they're not actively supporting you or you supporting them as family members. Also, there might be some friends that you and your children or your other friends think of as kind of like it's like your family. And that's becoming sort of more the way it is. There was a model of this established in the 1980s. It was a futuristic television show you might remember. It's called Golden Girls. And it was kind of a kooky idea at the time that four women would, rather than being living alone, would come together and be like a family. So it wasn't Leave It to Beaver with Ward and June and Wally and the Beeve. It was four women, one of whom was the mom, sharing responsibility, sharing life, looking after each other, having some fun. Of course, living communally or collectively is far less expensive than having a house or an apartment all to yourself. So I was wondering, maybe we should be having a Golden Girls redo here in the 2020s. I don't know, could happen. All right, so let's talk about funding your longer life. This is important too. We ask people, what are your top financial worries in the years ahead? Number one is costly health issue. By the way, another reason why we ought to be healthier, take better care of ourselves, might lower some of those costs. Inflation and not have enough money to go the distance. People are worried about having kind of a paycheck for life. They want to make sure that they're going to have the money to last them and give them peace of mind throughout their days. Yet 81% of our population say they don't know how much money they're going to need to fund retirement. That's dangerous. I mean, in previous times when people didn't live that long, or when more than half the population had an employer-sponsored guaranteed pension, you didn't have to figure it out on your own. But when we switched to 401ks, and when the boomer generation came along and we were far less frugal and likely to save money than our parents were, and we're living longer, whoa, to be so in the dark around your finances and your resources, not a smart thing. People want to understand finances better. Only about 26% of the American public has a financial advisor. I have a financial advisor. I recommend it, but doesn't mean it's right for everyone. But whether it's an employer or a church or the media, we've got to do a better job of not selling stuff or, picking stocks like Kramer does. We got to be talking about, these are the basics. This is how to work your way to a financially secure long life. And 9 in 10 Americans say that financial education should be a standard part of our lives, even for high school kids. That if we could learn the basics of compounding, diversifying risks, and the value of using tax protected platforms like 401ks and such, we'd all be better off. Last point I'm going to make in our visit here today has to do with maybe the most important part of life's third age, one that doesn't get talked about enough. There's too much talk, or there's a lot of talk, I'll say, about your body and eating your vegetables. I already did that. About how much money you're going to need. I did that. About enjoying your family. And now let's talk about, like, what do you want to be when you're a grown up? Here's a story from my life. A bunch of years ago, I was launching a book called The Power Years, and it was supposed to launch in a September of that year, and Katrina hit, and they canceled all the book tours. All the media was taken up by covering Katrina, and so I didn't launch that book through the media that year. And I said to myself and my co-author and my publisher, I'd like to donate all the earnings from that book to Habitat for Humanity. And let me go to a side story on Habitat for Humanity. As you can see here I am with longer, curlier hair on a hot day in Houston with President Carter. A year before that, President Carter and I had come together because he wanted me to help him write his book on aging. He called it The Virtues of Aging. It did very, very well. And he was an extraordinary human being to work with, to be friends with. We're still friends. Got a note from President Carter just last week. Yeah, I think he had his 96th birthday. He's not feeling well, but he's still building houses. I asked him if I could work on this house that he was going to be building. There were 4,000 of us actually came together to build 100 houses in 5 days in Houston. As him paying me back, he wanted to pay me back for working with him on his book. And I said, no, I don't want any money or anything. I want the honor of building a house with you. So I was his assistant. And for a week, under the 105-degree heat of Houston, I busted up my fingers, knuckles. I didn't know what I was doing, but I got to watch this older man in the spirit of giving. And the thousands of people working on that habitat build, most of them were retirees. And I thought, giving back, no small thing. And so I was reminded when I was decided to pledge my earnings from my book to Habitat of the benefits of what they do. And I thought, one day I'd like for my kids to judge me by what I do and what I did more than what I say. So I called the executive director of Habitat, Jonathan Reckford. And I said, Jonathan, a year or so ago, I worked with the president on a house build. He says, yeah, I know who you are. And I said, I'd like to donate all, if there are any earnings from this book coming out to New Orleans and the Habitat programs there. And he said to me, Ken, thank you. And I could see you've got that gnawing feeling. And I said to him, what gnawing feeling? He says, you're trying to make the transition from success to significance. A lot of people are going through that in your generation. And he was right. I think that we spend so much of our lives trying to make a success of ourselves that very often what gets pushed to the sidelines are doing good or doing right or helping others for no purpose other than you're helping them. Turns out that 89% of Americans feel that there should be more ways for retirees to use their talents and knowledge for the benefit of their communities and society at large. I hinted at this earlier, but right now only 24% of today's retirees do any volunteering at all. 76% don't. And remember that of those 68 million retirees in this country, they're watching over 2,800 minutes of TV a week. Spend not even 30 minutes or an hour or 5 hours out of those 2,800 minutes helping other people. Something wrong with that equation. Give me a story. Last fall, before COVID, I was giving a speech in Los Angeles, and the other speaker was the actor Harrison Ford. And I said to him, I was very excited to see him. I knew I'd be meeting him. He and I had a private meeting set up after our speeches. And during his speech, he talked about how we needed to have young people all around the planet planting trees. He was a climate activist, and he said, this will save the planet. And everybody cheered, young people planting trees. And so I had my private meeting with him. And I told him, how much I liked some of the movies he was in. He liked that. And then I said, we got 68 million retirees in this country. Why don't you get them planting the trees? He looked at me and says, what? I said, yeah, nobody's tasked them with anything. In fact, worldwide, there's 1 billion people who are retired. Nobody's tasked that group, that third age population, with anything. Imagine if some small segment, even 10 million older adults, started planting trees in whose shade they'd never sit. That would make a statement about a commitment to the future of the children and their children of tomorrow, which I'm not sure that we as elders are living up to. So what am I saying? Am I saying that as an older person, you're not off the hook? Yeah, that is what I'm saying. You're not off the hook. You got a lot of flexibility. You don't have to make a full-time career out of it. You don't have to do something you don't personally like. But if you can help out with some families or your community or the church or the environment or mentor people to help those younger people come through this tough time, you'll be doing a better version of yourself than if you do none of that. Here's an example.
Hello, hello.
Melissa.
Hi, Dick. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
It's the first time that I'm talking with someone from another country.
I'm very excited to be doing this.
I look like I'm only 25, but I'm 88.
I'm live with my old brother. He has 23 years.
Do you know, instead of saying he has 23 years, you could say he is 23 years old.
I tried to go to Lollapalooza that we have next week, I think, in Brazil, but my mom didn't let me.
You got a good mom.
Good morning, dear Julia. Good morning to you.
This is your dad?
That's me and my wife when we were young.
Oh, you were good looking when you were young. And you're still good looking.
If you could just dream and have whatever you want, what do you think you would like to be doing?
I see myself in a big family, with a beautiful wife. And I want to thank you for this change of experience, You are incredible.
Obrigado.
You are my new granddaughter.
And I love you.
I love you too.
And if you were here, I would give you a big hug.
Oh yeah, let's hug. Oh.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, I was very moved when I saw that. So let me move to the completion of my presentation. We've asked people in terms of their own family, what's important to pass on to your children or heirs? Firstly, people say, yeah, if you have any ownership of anything, a little property, some money, nice to pass that along, your inheritance. But then they also realize that maybe even more important are possessions that had emotional value. There's a study in Minnesota called Who Gets Grandma's Yellow Pie Plate that said it all. What about instructions and wishes to be fulfilled? Before my dad passed away, it's a personal story, he asked my brother and I to spend the day with him, talk about his death. We said, Dad, we don't want to talk about that. You're not going to die. Well, of course he's going to die. I don't know what everybody's problem is about dying. It's natural, I guess, but we're uncomfortable. He said, no, there's some things I have to discuss with you guys. And he wanted to tell us about where his finances were. And he wanted to tell us, most important, how he wanted his wife, our mom, cared for, because she was getting beaten down by Alzheimer's, that he never wanted her in an institution. And he always wanted her to be surrounded by aides and comfort and love. And he made us promise that we would do that with any of the resources we could possibly muster. By the way, we would have done it anyhow because my brother and I just loved our mom so much. And then the day ended. Oh, he made us agree, shake hands and agree. And my brother and I both felt, boy, that was kind of hard. But we felt our dad had really handled his business by letting us know what was important to him. And now his wishes were going to be fulfilled. And he felt relieved. And I was with him the night he died, a year or so later. And he was at peace because he knew that his commitment and love for his wife, our mom, was going to be respected. But last, people say, you know, what's important in all these things is stories. It doesn't have to be a long story. It's what matters to you in this life. What are your values? What are your life lessons? And if you've not taken the time to pass them along, to write them down, to have them recorded, to have them be there for your children and grandchildren, they'll be forgotten. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a personal slice of Dykewald here. I'm 70 now. When I was 27, after my grandfather had passed away, my grandmother was kind of a piece of work. She was great, never educated, grew up in an orphan asylum. She was hardly talked, but she was always making soup and looking after the grandkids. And my brother and I and our parents, we lived in the same house with our grandparents when we were little guys. So I thought I would fly to New Jersey with an old black and white, a reel-to-reel video recorder. They didn't have simple things like cell phones like they do today. And here you're going to see a few minutes of my exchange with my grandmother.
All right. First of all, how old are you?
Well, that I wouldn't know.
How come?
Because when I was born, my mother passed away, and there was no record of me.
What, do you figure you're over 60?
Oh, yes.
Figure you're over 70?
Oh, yes.
Figure you're over 80?
That I don't know. Around that age, I think. I was in the orphan asylum in Elizabeth. I don't know how long I was there. I stayed there quite some time. And then when I got a little older, whoever took me in, I boarded with them.
How old were you then? When you were very little?
Oh, I was a little girl yet. In my bare feet. Half the time we didn't have no shoes. We had no electric lights. We used to burn kerosene lamps. And there was no bathtubs. And the bathroom was about a block away from the house. You had to use a lantern to go out there at night.
How did Grandpa feel about you?
Well, he was in love with me.
How did you know?
Because he always told me.
What do you mean?
Well, he always told me how much he loved me and that he couldn't be without me. And he loved me very dearly. He was a very good husband and a good father. We used to sit and watch television, and when the number would come up, we'd get up and dance, the two of us.
No, you didn't.
Yes, we did. We'd get up and he'd take me in his arms and we'd dance.
Did you like that?
Sure, I liked it.
If there's a kind of message you'd like for all of us children and grandchildren to live on later on, 20, 50 years from now, what do you want us to learn from you that we can continue doing?
To be good, honest, respectable, and live happy with your families. Like I lived happy with my husband.
You're a sweetie, Clara.
That's enough?
For now, we got a few more things to do. Why do you think we're doing this?
I don't know you because you want to remember me. And you like me. Right?
That's right.
That you love me.
I do love you.
And I love you too. From the minute you were born, I loved you. And find a nice girl and get married and I'll love you double.
Yeah, my grandmother. I think we need an elder corps, like the Peace Corps, but I think we need to gather up millions of older people and make it easy and fun and stimulating for them to give back and help fix the world. So let me tie it all together. We are embarking on a new stage of life. It's quite amazing. It's being sparked by longevity. And as a result, this uncharted frontier, we're going to have to create new ideas, new maps, new language, new solutions, new possibilities. And we are the frontiersmen. We are the pathfinders. Hopefully in the course of this presentation, and with great thanks to the folks at Beacon and Stuart, I've given you a few things to think about, a few examples of how people are trying to do this one well, a little bit like setting the stage with Roger Bannister's example. Maybe if we see a few of the pathfinders and the front runners, we can do some of the same and populate some of these new ideas and make them commonplace for future generations. Thank you so much for listening. We're going to have a few minutes for questions and answers, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Ken. That was so insightful and inspiring. You've given us so many things to think about, how we might change our lives and see our future in a different light. I do have a few questions for you. Many younger Americans don't expect Social Security to be there for them when they retire. And that was before they heard you say they might live to 150. So what changes should we expect to see in Social Security and Medicare as our longevity continues to grow? Will we be able to afford it as a society?
Oh, tough question. But I'll give you an honest answer. I don't know that we're getting a lot of honest answers from our political entertainers these days. Social Security was a well-intentioned program for a time when there were 159 workers for each recipient. So you had a small amount was contributed from your paycheck, and it went to pay for a small amount of older people who were going to live just a few years. We're now down to about 2.5 to 1 in terms of the dependency ratio. So there's whole lot of older people, not quite the big pyramid of young people under them. And instead of living for a couple of years, we're now talking 2025. So that's going to strain the system. Here's what I would do if I was in charge, and then I'll answer the question in terms of young people. I think we need to move the date back even further on which we receive it. The day that Social Security was signed, the average life expectancy in America was only 63. It's now 79. The fact that we all know we're getting old later, but we want to get our old age security benefits at the same age as old age was marked 50 years ago, 100 years ago, kind of thing, just seems unfair. I think a lot of older people are kind of got the country by the throat around this one. And I think we need to move it back a bit so that it's indexed to our longevity, not tied to some obsolete notion of old age. I also think that the amount that's put in should be taxed at a higher level. That is to say, both a little bit more of the tax and also the point at which they stop taxing it, I think should be lifted up so that people who have more resources will pay a little bit more in. I also think it should be affluence tested, not means tested, affluence tested. We do have many, many billionaires and millionaires receiving Social Security. And I would rather take that money and give it to the elders, the older elders particularly, who are really hurting financially and are particularly vulnerable, who more tend to be single women living alone, often single older women of color. So I would double down even more of Social Security on those who need it more and give less to those who need it less. Last, I would really make savings in America mandatory. And I know that that goes against the American spirit. We'd like to be able to put money into our 401k if we feel like it. We'd like to be able to put only some in if we're not in the mood to max it out. And my experience is that for young people, the power of compounding is very, very, very enormous. So a little bit of money put aside each day, each week in your 20s and 30s and 40s is going to amount to a great deal in your later years. And I would like to see Social Security, since I think it is such a viable safety net, persist for generations to come. But in order to do so, it's got to be responsive to the demographic force that the massive number of boomers are going to be placing on younger generations. I'll also add that Social Security is, in my view, Stuart, has been an exchange of good faith. Excuse me. That a lot of people pay in expecting they're paying it in to support today's elders so that when they get to be elders, the next generation will feel the same about them. But today's elder generation, not the boomers, the generation in front of the boomers, got a lot of respect and regard. The boomers are a more choppy bunch, you know? And so I worry that when I say these hashtag OK Boomer articles and signals and signs and social media, that a lot of young people think that we boomers have botched things up. You know, when Greta Thunberg gave her speech at the UN and she said, hey, what's with you guys? Look at the planet you're leaving for us. It's like, who are you kidding here? You got countries burning down and clean water and not existent in a lot of places. How could you let that happen? And when I see that that wealth has become increasingly concentrated into the hands of not rich people just, but old people. People over 50 control 70% of the wealth in this country. That, I don't know, I guess I'd like to see that before our time on the stage is over, that we rethink some of the entitlements and benefits to be sure to give enough possibility to young people so that they can feel some peace of mind and security, but also give more back as a generation so that young people don't just think we're just trying to drain, you know, draining and hoarding, that we're going to take as much as we can get and hold on to it. I think that we're beginning to create the impression that we older people are not really out for anyone other than ourselves or our own families, but not for the community at large, or not really for people who are struggling and in need, that there needs to be more equity.
That's a very good point. I want to tie that into a second question, I think. I love the way that you showed us in the colonial era that having white hair was a sign of wisdom and inspired respect. What steps can we take as older adults today, as individuals, to help us get back to that feeling that older adults are there to inspire others?
I've never been asked that question, and I am so glad you asked it to me because I've been thinking about that quite a lot. So I'm going to say things that are probably going to offend some of your viewers, and that's okay.
Right.
Because I'm an elder now that I've hit 70, and I can say what's on my mind. And since you're not paying me, I don't have to worry about losing my contract. First of all, we need to stop being so self-indulgent. We are so much more involved in our own lives, in our own generation, in our own music, and in our own language, and our own fashions than that of younger people. For example, and Stuart, I'm not going to do this to put you on the spot, but are you familiar with what FOMO is?
No.
Right. FOMO, if you're under the age of 35, you surely know what FOMO is. It's called fear of missing out. It's the primary psychological driver of young people that's been triggered by the internet. And it creates massive amount of addiction to technology, depression, and suicide. And yet most older people haven't even taken the time to figure out what that word means or don't even come in contact with it. Give you another example, and I don't mean this to put you on the spot. What do you know about Charlie D'Amelio?
Nothing.
Charlie D'Amelio is the most influential young person in America. She's 16 years old. She's got 96 million followers on TikTok. She's a nice kid. She lives in Southern California. She means well. And everybody under the age of 35 knows who Charlie D'Amelio is. Now, I only use those as two examples. I could give you 1,000 examples. Most older people are clueless about what is actually occurring in the world of young. And to make things worse, we have a different racial ethnic makeup among young people. Among people over 65, we're 77% white. Among people under 25, it's a minority majority. We're just under 50% white. And that's because of the way America's been changing over the decades. And so a lot of older people really hunker down into they're not like me. Those aren't my kids. I love my children and grandchildren, but I don't know about those kids from the other part of town. And, that to me is not the spirit of America. I got to spend the 79th birthday with Ronald Reagan. I've also spent time with other presidents. I had not been a fan of Reagan, but I fell in love with him, spending the day with him that day. And he specifically told me that partly what made America so special was how you could come here from any part of the world and become an American. That's what America was. If I moved to Japan, I lived there the rest of my life, I would never be Japanese. If I moved to Brazil, I would never be Brazilian. I would always be an American living in Brazil. But America is a different story. We can all become Americans. And I think that those of us who are older are kind of caught back in the past a little too much and are not focusing enough on how hard young people are struggling to pay their college debt down. When people say, I went to college, I had debt. Yeah, forget it, man. 40 years ago, colleges were really inexpensive. The cost of college has gone up 1,400%. So what would it be like to be a 22-year-old girl, and there are more girls than boys graduating college, with $37,000 in debt that you're going to have to take 15 years to pay off? Therefore, you may not be able to think you can afford a home or a child. Most older people aren't even aware of that, the strain on that. And so when you see people like AOC or Bernie Sanders who are appealing to young people, they're talking their language because that college debt is really killing these kids. What else? These kids can't afford health insurance, or if they're in the gig economy. So when they say, hey, give us some guaranteed benefits, some guaranteed insurance, and we say, no, that's not our problem, it just makes us look like we're not empathetic. So, and the last thing I'll say, and I'm being a little bit preachy here, and I apologize, but I value your question, is that I think a lot of older people do a lot of complaining about how society has made us irrelevant because we're off on the sidelines. I think a lot of older people make themselves irrelevant. They don't learn the new technologies. That TikTok-y stuff, I don't get it. And Zoom, not for me, Well, get with it, Or if you don't understand why Billie Eilish is so popular or Kanye West is so fascinating, study them. Find someone you could have teach you. Maybe it's your grandchild, We need to find ways to become connected to the modern age. And it takes work, just like fitness takes work, being modern takes work. learning the modern TV shows, learning the modern music, learning the modern persons of influence, learning what's happening with regard to young people struggling to get ahead, learning about how people are losing their jobs who are young right now and are scared out of their wits and don't know who they can count on. I think we do too little of being empathetic as older adults, and shame on us.
Wow, that was great. So this ties in perhaps a little bit to something you were starting to say at the end there. In what ways do you think our lives are going to change long term based on the changes we've experienced as a result of the COVID pandemic?
Oh, I wish I knew for sure. You know, we're all in a state of what's going on here. Here's some of the things, and I want to anchor it in my specialty, which is this longevity, age wave theme versus just COVID, although I have been going to school on COVID a little bit too. So first of all, I think that we are going to continue to live long lives. I think that we hopefully will be not traumatized by this year of mask wearing and social distancing and become people who are distant from one another, because I think as human beings, we crave the connection. I hope one day soon we come back to believing that there are people of knowledge and science and expertise whose points of view should be respected and followed. I think we have, you know, my son lived in China for 10 years, he's 30, and he's told me the story of how some of the Chinese communists, when they were trying to take power, they made fun and they belittled people of knowledge and literally sent them out to the farms. You know, if you were educated or knowledgeable or you had written things, you were taken away from society because they felt that dumbing down the society was the way to have power over it. And I sure hope we're not doing that with America. What else? I think that we're going to be more appreciative of resilience. That, boy, everybody's been kicked in the head a little bit this last year. And those people who seem to be holding up the strongest from it are not young people. You know, to be a 20-year-old right now and what happened in my career, what happened in my college life, am I ever going to fall in love? Am I ever going to have a solid future? Young people are getting hurt, you know? Older people, I think it's a time that we appreciate the resilience and emotional intelligence more than you know, wealth or power as it used to be. Give me an example. David Brooks, who I only met once, is a writer for the New York Times, a very thoughtful fellow. He said this before COVID, but I think it rings very true. He said, at the end of our days, we will have had two resumes. One is our career resume. What did you do? What were your titles? How much did you get paid? How big was your home? What was your zip code? No one's going to care about that. The other is your eulogy resume, he said. And that is, who were you as a person? Who were you as a person? What did you do for the world? What is it people are going to most appreciate and respect about the life you live? That brushstroke of your life. And he also pointed out, and I will too, that if you're listening to this, you're not over yet. So if you think about your eulogy resume and think, oh, that's not going to be very good, there's still time to fix it. So I think that our later years are a time to be better versions of ourselves, not lesser. Last, I'm going to say, Stuart, then on this, I think there's going to be a greater appreciation for connection. We put a lot of attention in the last pre-COVID years on disconnection, on imagining that because we were sending text, we were really building friendships, or doing too many things at the same time. I have chosen to view this rather than as a sheltering period, but rather as a cocooning period. And the idea that the whole world has been given kind of a near-death experience, that on the one hand, certainly the lives we were all living died, you know? And so we've been going through Elizabeth Kubler-Ross 5 stages of grief and bereavement, you know, denial, anger, sadness, acceptance, so on. And then making a new life, like the caterpillar turns itself into a chrysalis and kind of reconstitutes itself and comes out a butterfly. I know that's kind of a children's fable, but I guess I'd like to feel that partly what will come out of this is that Many of us will have found the time in all this to decide that some of what we did and some of who we did it with were not worth it. That we need to come out of this better versions of ourselves, both for our own selves, for our families, and for our legacy, and also for the needs of the world.
Last question. What is your vision for the next 20 years, personally and professionally?
20 years, huh?
Oh, 30 then, okay.
I think usually in terms of 5-year chunks.
Okay.
I don't know. I'll just kind of wander, and then maybe this will be a time capsule. If I'm gone, somebody can watch this and see if I got it right. But I thought going into COVID that I was going to be winding my career down. I figure I've written a lot of books. I've given a lot of talks, met a lot of presidents. Time for me to kind of go to the sidelines and play more. I don't know. With everything that's gone on this year, you know, and I used to give maybe 1 or 2 keynotes a month. I was a busy guy in that business. I've given 14 already this month. I feel more activated now than I ever have before. And so I'd like to keep going. I'd like to continue to play a role and help prepare the world for this age wave. I don't feel done with that. But I don't want to work as hard, right? So a little bit what I said in my talk, I'd like to work fewer days and fewer weeks out of each year. So my wife and I are going to have more time to play. I'd like to learn how to have fun again. We did a study last year where we identified all the leading experts on aging-related topics, you know, depression, anxiety, housing, osteoporosis, and so on. And there's lots of them. But in the topic of fun, there was not one expert. Everybody says they want to have more fun, yet we don't really know how to do that. So I've got friends who think, oh, it's by acting like you're 22 again and getting drunk all the time. Doesn't work for me. I'm trying to have more fun. So I'm opening myself up to that. I'm taking on people that I'm mentoring. I'm spending more time with younger people. I'm an Eldera mentor. You can go to eldera.com. It's a little bit like that video I showed about the older people in Brazil, the older people in Chicago helping the kids in Brazil. I have an Eldera child that I mentor each week, and she's fantastic. And everybody can do that. It doesn't cost anything. You don't have to pay anything. I also would like to try my hand at writing a novel and maybe a science fiction story about, I like to call it The Cure, about a breakthrough with regard to aging and longevity. I've never written maybe make a movie. I would love that one of my kids or both of them one day has grandchildren. I see my friends who are grandparents and I think, oh, that just looks so juicy. So yes, I'd like to keep my work going, but keep evolving. I am hopeful that I can keep myself healthy and my wife. That matters so much to me. I'd love to keep connecting to my family. I'd like to keep making a difference. And I'd like to see if we can come to an age where there's a little more thoughtfulness and empathy and kindness once again.
I'm not surprised that you had such great things to say about that, about your own personal life ahead of you. And thank you so much for all you've contributed to us today. We really all appreciate it. And I hope you'll take just a few minutes to look around the rest of our expo site yourself and see if you find things that are fun and interesting to learn and to do. Thank you again.
Thank you, Stuart. Good luck to everyone. Thank you.